It is February 25th. We're almost 2 months through the year, you guys. Hopefully everything's on target. You're getting the listings, you're getting the sales, you're getting with the buyers. And that's what brings us with today's subject matter. So here's what I've been hearing. Here's what I've been seeing. And I dare say if I asked all of the managers as they're reviewing your purchase agreements coming in, what we're seeing is that you are negotiating your buyer broker compensation as part of the negotiation of a purchase agreement. And my question is why? So that's what we want to talk about today, and about fighting for your compensation. So let's get into it a little bit here. See if this will cooperate for me. Here's what we know. We immediately sit down with the buyer, or at least prior to showing them a home, touring, as the settlement says, and we're having them sign an agreement. In front of you here, we have the buyer representation contract. What we know is that it is here, and it says that I get paid on any real property located in the state of Michigan that you purchase. I'm the exclusive agent for this. So again, if we're doing this up front prior to touring or showing any property, we're going to get paid. Now, what's the other part of this? We have this checkbox here in case there's those buyers who say, look, I just want to see the house.
Perfect.
All right. Sounds good. So here's where we're at. Again, we're looking at the buyer representation contract. The second box that we have is so that if there's a buyer that says, just show me the house. Well, ask two good questions. Like, if I show it to you, will you buy it from me? If they say yes, great. Will you sign an agreement that says I get paid? They say yes. Then that is the section here that we would complete. We'd put in specific addresses. Okay. Now, from there, we go in and we do the compensation. So again, this is all done before we even show homes. And compensation says that I can't receive any more than I sign a contract for. That was required as part of the settlement. We then jump in and we have how much compensation that we are going to receive. So we're putting in here the 3% of the sale price. If I put in 2, how much do I get? I get 2. If I put in 2.5 and the seller's offering or listing broker's offering 4, how much do I get? 2.5. Okay. So guys, we are really negotiating our compensation right now, sitting down with the buyer. We're not negotiating it as part of the purchase agreement. Our agreement is established. So the compensation obligation will also apply to purchase agreements executed within 6 months, we know, is a minimum. We call it the protection clause. You'll remember that from all of the training that you've had in the past. And of course, the last part, paragraph 5. This, I believe, is where we believe, or we start to think, that we are going to negotiate our compensation again as part of the purchase agreement. The answer is no. I want you to just catch what it says. Buyer will receive a credit against any amount owed pursuant to paragraph 4 above for any compensation paid by the seller or the listing broker. There is a credit that is given. So what goes into the purchase agreement becomes the question. Well, that's where we have to remember this next part. So we've got a buyer who just signed that agreement. That agreement was signed for 3%. Therefore, the buyer is now responsible for seeing that we get paid. They are the party who's paying us. Hang with me. They're the party that just signed a contract saying that they're going to compensate us 3% of the purchase price. They knowingly signed a contract saying that they're going to pay us 3% of the purchase price. And that contract said that any money that you got from the seller's broker, gets credited toward that amount. So the buyer makes an offer, and here's what we know. Probably 95% of the time, it is asking the seller to pay the compensation. How is that being done? That is being done through the purchase agreement. If that is it, seller is paying the full amount, it becomes very simple for us. We put the full 3% on the purchase agreement. Seller to contribute 3% of the purchase price to be applied toward buyer's broker's fee. And keep it that simple. That's all you would have to do. Now, there is an option, as we know, we could get from the listing broker. If the listing broker is going to compensate, then we need a buyer's broker compensation agreement. Keep it that simple. The only time that we have to worry about the buyer pulling money out of their pocket is when the seller or listing broker is unwilling to pay the full compensation. Everybody good with that? Those that I can see on camera, give me a head nod if that all makes sense, because we'll go with a consensus, a thumbs up, head nod, it all looks good. Okay. If we keep it that simple, then we're really that good. Now, we're going to do a little bit of math. 2 plus 1 is 3. 2.5 plus a half is 3. 0 plus 3 is still 3. The 3 represents the amount of money, the percentage of the purchase price that the buyer signed a contract for. So if I use 2 plus 1, let's use it this way. The seller agreed to pay 2%. How much does the buyer owe? 1%. Purchase agreement, checked off. Seller's going to pay 2%. Buyer will pay the remaining amount, basically. You got the 2 boxes. If it was, I could get 2.5 from, matter of fact, let's go with either the seller or the listing broker. Then the other half comes from the buyer. If I've got a seller who was unwilling to compensate, then I just put it on the purchase agreement. I won't put it the way that I put it in the past, but I don't care what the seller or the listing broker is offering. It doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. Would everybody agree with that? You see, it doesn't matter. Now, matter of fact, let me stop my share so that you can see my board. Let me know you guys can see that pretty clearly. Let's call the seller, call the listing broker. We won't get into FSBO, but call the listing broker. Are you offering compensation? No, I've got a silly seller. Here's the other one, right? Well, we're not disclosing the amount, but they are offering some compensation, because we've all heard that. Well, then we still treat that the same. It's 0 also. Now, that's not really showing up there very well, is it? Let's try blue. 0 and 0. Okay, how's that? I'm looking at a small picture, so hopefully you can see this. I put it on, it's 3%. It doesn't matter that the seller was offering nothing or the listing broker wouldn't disclose. If I call them up and they said, oh, well, we're offering 2, it doesn't matter. So guys, I'm giving you a little bit of a mindset, a little attitude adjustment. You've already negotiated your compensation. It's already done. Now, how the buyer compensates you is up to them. How do they want us to do it most of the time, especially as we share and work with them? They want us to do it through the purchase agreement. Now, some of you are old enough in the business to remember when we used to ask for seller concessions. Concessions getting applied toward prepaids, closing costs, taxes, anything else that the mortgage company would allow. So let's look at that for a second. Was it ever advertised in the past about the seller offering concessions? And the answer is no. It wasn't. And yet we had buyers, and we're running into this again now, buyers who need help in buying a home. So the mortgage company says to you, I think, Deb, it'd be a great idea if you can get 3% in seller concessions. It gets applied toward the closing cost, taxes, prepaids, and any other allowable expense. All right. There were no houses, there were no sellers offering that. So we would go out and we'd see a house listed for $200,000. The buyer says, I'll give you $200,000, and then I need 3% back in seller concessions. Everybody's with me. What was the very worst thing that happened? They couldn't agree. And what happened to that deal? It died because they needed the 3%. Well, let me then look at it this way. Does the buyer not need 3% if it was a broker compensation? Do they not owe that money? Do they not need that money? So if it can't be negotiated as a seller compensation, or excuse me, seller concession, why would we feel the need to give away your money and not collect your full compensation? Why would we negotiate our compensation? Go find them another house that will work. And then I want you to think of it this way. We'll stay with that same scenario, because here is what we're failing to recognize, I believe. Take the same $200,000 house, ask for 3%. Seller would say, no, but I would do it for 206. Buyer, great news. They've taken everything in regards to your offer, but one thing. For them to do it, you need to purchase it for 206,000. Would that work for you? Yes. And they sign the papers. Well, now instead of that being a seller concession, buyer, broker, compensation. So my message to you is this, and I got Mays here in the office. Mays is like, no, I get my 3%. He had somebody asking him to take less when he offered $20,000 over asking price. Well, my seller's only offering 2.5. I don't care. My buyer offered you $20,000 more. He owes me 3%. Don't screw with my compensation. I hope you don't mind my directness. Guys, your compensation is not up for negotiation when it comes to the purchase agreement. It's got to be a mindset. I don't negotiate it. The buyer wants to pay the compensation through the transaction. If we got to adjust the top to make the bottom work, that's what we would do. That's your point of negotiation. Now, it's a really simple concept, and I'm not going to tip my hat that says, hey, I know I'm asking you to pay 3% and your seller was not offering any, but if he needs to reject it, just pump up the price. That's really what we're talking about doing, but I can't tip that hat until they've said no. If they come back and say, well, Darwin, you got 3% on here, my seller's only offering 2.5%. I understand, but my buyer is asking the seller to pay the full compensation that I am owed. As agents get educated, here's what we know they're going to do. They're going to say, Dinesh, I hate to say it, but my seller had to reject. But I believe that your compensation is important to you and the buyer needs to pay that. Here's what he's willing to do. And my seller would leave the compensation the same and adjust the asking price. So we need to simply keep it simple, salespeople, and not negotiate. Now, I'm not saying that we never would. Truth be told, I had one that we put in. I did everything I could. I got everything out of the buyer and the seller that I could. And if we didn't do a little adjustment of about $1,500, my buyer was going to lose it. Now that's a $300,000 sale and they have a $400,000 house they're going to buy. Or excuse me, $300,000 sale, 400 that they're going to list. It was a good business decision at that point to make an adjustment to my compensation. But that's when I finally did it. When I absolutely had everything out. And yeah, I can see the appraisal issue is coming up. Yep. That could be an issue. It could be the issue why a seller would say no to your offer. Could be, but that's for somebody else to figure out and worry about. In our case, we wouldn't worry about it if it was concessions as the buyer. So I'm not going to worry about my compensation as the buyer. It's up to the seller to decide if that's an issue for them. But if they say yes and it comes low, well, seller's going to have to lower the price. And if it's close, might we negotiate our compensation? We might. We just got to stay away from doing it. We have to go with the aspect that my compensation is not a part of the negotiation of a purchase agreement because my buyer has already signed. It's already been negotiated. They owe me this money. You'd be surprised at how many buyers don't want you to reduce your compensation. And we're doing it without them even asking. Dinesh, you had a question?
Yeah, if you reduce the buyers from 3% to say negotiate for 2.5%, or
So if we reduce our compensation
from 3 to 2.5,
from 3 to 2.5,
do we have to sign that paper? That
do we have to re-sign? So great question, because here's what we know. There was confusion in the beginning with all of this that we could not change our compensation. That came from a misunderstanding. The reality is that we cannot take more than what we're contracted for. So if I'm going down, would it be required of me to sign a new agreement? No, because it's us taking less. If there was any legal that wanted to come after us because we charged them less, there'd be I don't know where the world would be going at that point. It's when we go more. And the only thing I would be lost with is a buyer who's actually saying, I would be happy to let you take that additional compensation. But think of it, if it was another $3,000, the reality is, if the seller wasn't paying that, what would that be for the buyer? $3,000 less. If you actually negotiated that, guess what? The contract says I'm going to take 2.5%. I collected 3.5%. That's 1% extra. Whose money is it? It's the buyer's. Because it's a credit against what is owed. We can't take more, and if we try, we need to then sign a new agreement. If it's more, yes, we got to have it signed. If it's less, no, we shouldn't have to worry about that at all. Is it a good idea? Sure. But nah, I wouldn't worry about it. That deal falls apart, you're now committed to a lower amount. So I wouldn't worry about that one. Good question. Let's see. I'm gonna open up my chat if I can. Where's my chat at? Where's all my stuff? Give me a second. Anybody got any questions? Take yourself off mute and we'll do it that way too.
I have a question.
Okay, go ahead, Karen.
I just put it in chat. So if we have the broker to broker compensation agreement at 2.5%, and we have the buyer agreement at 3%, I was questioning, where do we show that the buyer is paying that other 0.5%, or do we have to show it because it's already in the buyer agreement?
Well, and that is the real key on that one, Karen. So let's scratch it out. We've got a buyer representation contract that says the buyer owes us 3. We negotiate through the purchase agreement 2.5% from the seller.
Buyer
Which
broker.
leaves 0.5% that is still owed.
Yes.
So we don't have anybody else to pay it. Therefore, that's on the buyer. And where we would note that at, if you've ever wondered, why are all these doggone blanks on this silly buyer broker requirements? I always say that we need to rename those. Should be broker instructions.
Mm-hmm.
So how, matter of fact, I want you to think about this, Karen, and everyone else, because this question has come up before. How does the title company know what you're getting on the selling or sellers or listing side? How do they know?
The broker requirement form.
There you go. So really, that's what the broker requirement is all about. And what we're going to do is to put the instruction that the buyer would owe an additional 0.5%. So let me do this. Everything changes the way this shows me here. Let me share screen. And I want to share. So here's our buyer broker compensation, or our purchase agreement, paragraph 5. So what we would put in here, I just got to remember to, no, I'm not going to put it. What I would put in here would be the 2.5 from the seller.
Mm-hmm.
And down here, I would put 0.5%. So now it's actually on the purchase agreement.
Okay. So let me ask another question. And this is because with my buyer broker agreements, I actually put 3.5% majority of my buyer broker agreements.
Okay.
So when the seller is paying that 3%, I still get another 0.5% from my buyer because we do a lot more work than we used to. And I'm just saying that's what I do. So I always get an extra 0.5%, and I don't want that disclosed to the seller because it's not necessary for the seller to know that.
Yeah, I would agree.
So can I just put that on my broker requirement form?
Yes.
Okay,
Yep. And then I would clarify for them because of the way that our purchase agreement is written.
okay, okay.
And you know, hey, in the end, they may find out anyway,
They're gonna
depending
say
upon
it-
how they've done the seller statements and this,
Right, they're
I
gonna
should,
sit on a seller statement,
yeah,
exactly. But then I don't want them to come back to renegotiate or to try to do anything doing the
yeah,
deal.
yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, you could definitely do that. And I love that you understand what your value is. As a matter of fact, I think somebody else put that in the chat. We just need to know what our value is.
Yes.
So, all right. Great question, great input. I'm scanning back. Let's see
I
that.
would mention too, that one of the things that I do when I have that negotiation of my buyer agreement, I do, and I put it in the buyer agreement at the bottom for other, I do let my buyer know that if they're purchasing a home where the seller is participating at anything less than 3%, that I will waive that 0.5% for them. Because I'm not gonna have them pay a 1% and then still pay that too, or 2%, whatever. So
Yeah,
I will waive the 0.5% under that circumstance only.
very cool. Very cool. I like that. Shows that we've got the creativity. Karen, I appreciate your participation with it. Scott asked, would I still call or text the listing broker to ask what compensation is? Great question. And, I've said this often. I said it earlier. Only I've said it in different terms, but I could care less what the listing broker or seller is offering. So that's what Scott is referring to. And the answer is, do I still call and ask? I believe as part of our fiduciary duties to the buyer that the answer is yes. Because it means that we will have to negotiate. They're in a mindset of potentially paying nothing, and we're going to ask for that 3%. That may make a decision as to what the buyer wants to look at and what they may offer on if, say, they were headed down to 2 homes. So that would be a yes, I believe that we still should, and that's due to our fiduciary duties. How does it work when the listing broker covers the cost instead of the seller? Could you provide an example of how that would look? I haven't encountered that. So we've talked in the past about how this would look. So let me highlight that change. Instead of the seller, I'm going to leave it the same scenario just because it's exactly the same, but I want you to catch the difference. It's no longer on the PA. It's on a broker compensation agreement, and that is now the listing broker who's taken on the responsibility to pay us. That's the only change. Buyer compensation agreement, listing broker.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep, I got you, Brenda.
Okay, thank you. So I'm wondering kind of more about the scenario of when one would take place versus the other.
So when we first came out with it, we thought that we were going to need the broker compensation agreement because we were so focused on previous times where it was the listing broker who guaranteed our compensation. We no longer have that. So we've kind of got to go past that and go, when do we need it? Best would be before we make an offer. But then we came up with a scenario where there's the brokers that are going, well, we're not going to disclose to you what we're doing. So let's say it's the 2.5, we'll leave it at that. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And my buyer says, don't worry about it. Keep it simple. Stay with the 2.5. I'll pay the half. and we have the listing broker who says, well, I'm not going to tell you. Then we send with the purchase agreement, the broker compensation agreement, and the buyer is going to make their purchase agreement contingent upon the listing broker signing the broker compensation agreement at 2.5%. Because the buyer's making sure that they don't have to pull out any money out of their pocket.
Okay, so there's situations where if the seller doesn't want to pay the 0.5%, the listing broker might pay the difference? And we can
You
ask.
could throw that out. Absolutely, you could do that. In which case, let's make that adjustment to our scenario. So let's say we had our full 3. We could get, let's say we do it this way. 2.5 came from the seller, and that's on the PA.
Mhm.
The 0.5% could come from the listing broker, and that would be on the buyer compensation agreement.
Okay, so we could negotiate, and then once we realize that the seller's offering 2.5%, or let's say we made the call and they said, okay, seller's offering 2.5%, then we could submit an offer where it says 2.5% on the purchase agreement, and then have a listing
Seller?
broker agreement that says for the broker to pay an additional 0.5%.
Yeah, and guys, here's the reason I throw this out. This is going to sound like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth. Your compensation is negotiable. It can go up. If you haven't seen it, this is going on. But we don't know it on the buyer side. Listing broker is doing 6%, only offering 2.5. So this is the buyer broker. Listing broker is actually keeping 3.5%.
And that would be on the listing agreement, so the buyer agent wouldn't see that.
Yeah, we wouldn't know that they charged 6 and kept 3. We only know that they're offering 2.5. And then we get to the closing, and this happens. Real estate agents get very upset when they see that they only got 2.5 and the listing broker kept 3.5. Well, you shouldn't have negotiated. It's your own fault. Don't hate me. I'm just delivering the message. It's your fault. You had a contract that said that you were going to get 3. You're the one that accepted 2.5. Let the listing broker deal with the seller and let them negotiate their part if it has to be. See, this is where they really wanted everything to go. The reality, my belief, it should be costing buyers more money now than it did before, because we were just simply taking what the listing broker was offering as compensation. It doesn't matter anymore. It just doesn't matter. Let's see. Yeah, John put it out here. I needed to ask any more for my commission. I put my all in the negotiations with the seller. Gosh, you know, I might be a little off on this, but I'm going to throw something out. I'm going to have a video coming out later because I want you to know something. There's that blank on the buyer representation agreement that says that we get X%, right? Deals are coming through that have this blank, which if it's blank, how much did you sign a contract? How much do you get paid? Thank you. So you get zero if nothing's in there, and if you put zero in, how much do you get paid? Zero. Folks, it's really important that you understand. The buyer is paying you, but they're getting creative on how they pay you. If you put zero, even though listing broker is offering 3 or the seller's offering 3, you still get 0. Anybody want to work for nothing? Quit it. Stop. Yep, I'm getting loud and emphasizing. Stop it. You have to put the number in there because that's what you will get. Blank or 0 won't cut it. At some point, you and the company will get nothing from it. I hope that emphasis was strong. Let's see. Hopefully it's priced right to appraise. We hit that one. Lara lawsuit was bonus for realtors. Absolutely. Mr. Koski, you laid it right out there. It was a bonus. We should be getting what we are hitting. Lisa puts it out there. Sell your worth. Absolutely. Karen, that was the one that we hit. Wow. I think we've got it all, guys. You got any questions? I have a comment.
Seller says they're not paying anything,
Seller says, I'm not paying.
and the buyer says, okay, so I want to send another offer with a 3% less
Okay.
as the one.
So here's a scenario. I love this. So seller's offering no compensation, and I got a buyer who's kind of smart. We'll keep this simple. So we offered 100,000, asking for the 3%. Seller said no. Buyer says, okay, you don't want to pay any compensation. I'll take care of the buyer's broker. I'll give you 97,000 and I'll pay it myself. By the way, here, I'll do the math anyway. Just this less this is 97,000. This plus the 3,000 they're going to pay their listing broker is still 100,000. The last I knew, that was the same, and that was the same. Could you do that? Yep. Because let's point out that you're lacking gray matter to a seller. Okay, well, as long as I'm not paying compensation, and I do believe that those people are out there. So absolutely. On the other hand, I love the house. If the seller wasn't smart enough, then let me offer 103,000 and you still pay my 3,000 for my buyer broker. Last I knew, that was 100,000 net, which is the same as that number, which is the same as this number, which comes out to the same thing, except for it's now they're getting their additional 3,000. It was simply a different way of working it out. It's countering. And remember this, if you got cash buyers, you might be farther ahead to actually just pay the compensation yourself as a buyer. Why give the money to the seller and ask the seller to pay it? Doesn't quite make sense, does it? I should be able to actually offer 3% less because my buyer is going to pay it themselves. Good one. Anybody else got anything? No, nothing else in the chat. Guys, I thought we'd be done in less than 30 minutes. You took me 41. I hope you have a great one. Look, lots of stuff coming up. You got things you're running into. Please pass them my way. Let me know what your questions are, what you're running into, and we'll answer everything that we can. Miss Brenda?
Thank you,
Hold
Darwin.
on. I think Valerie just put something in the chat.
Did she? You
Valerie
want to read it to
McGee.
me?
Yes. On the 97K example, the 3,000 is 3% on a 100K, not 9.
Yeah, otherwise, do the
Okay.
math right.
Yeah,
Because
Okay.
it's now 3% on 97,000, which is gonna throw a few dollars off. So, this is for the simplicity of knowing what we're doing, but yeah, it's going to be a different number. But it ain't much and we're not gonna worry about it. For sure, because it's,
yeah, I got you. I just, Danny
yeah,
just told me that Valerie typed in a question, so I just pulled it up real quick, but thank
yeah.
you.
No, that's a good one. I'm glad that you caught it. And Valerie, thank you for pointing that out because we do have to remember that. It is going to be a different number.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
Unrelated to this. This is maybe next topic.
Okay.
Are there going to be some adjustments made to the, I'm so sorry. Are there going to be some adjustments made to the purchase agreement?
Yeah,
Because
Karen, if I remember right, you're in Lansing.
because it is very convoluted for us compared to what we were used to.
Um,
Currently, I'm using the GLARP one just because.
yes. I think right now what we've decided to do and just check with Erica on this or Craig. But I think you're staying with that for right now.
Okay.
And we are looking to be looking, how can we get our standard purchase agreement that would actually work for what are customary to Lansing.
Okay, perfect. Wonderful.
But yep, stay with what you're using, but confirm with that with Craig and Erica.
Okay, wonderful.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
All right, gang. Well,
Hey,
I'll tell you.
Darwin,
Oh, yep. Go ahead, Val.
so following up on what Karen had mentioned, with the changes that were made to the purchase agreement, many of the library clauses have the wrong sections spelled
Like
out.
paragraph something, something.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think I made a couple of the adjustments, but if you know those specifically, send that to me. Because we're looking at a whole lot of paperwork. We've got forms that need to go into transaction desk. We got forms that need to go into transaction desk for Flex and the GMAR MLS. We've got forms that got
it's
to get
just,
set for a
yeah,
lot, but
it's just a good practice for the
yeah,
agents to double check those is what I'm saying too.
you're so good to have around. So yeah, gang, let me know when they're off. Yeah, make sure you're looking when every time you see a reference to paragraph something, something, make sure it is correct. That is a absolutely valuable practice. Good stuff, you guys.
Thank you very much.
All right, gang. Well, we'll wrap it all up. Another hot topic. We'll see you next week. Have a good one.